Thugs? We'll get back to thugs. Let's establish something about the mystery of Edwin Drood right up front. Yes, it does have something to do with thugs. More fundamentally speaking, what sort of book is it? What sort of story is it? Well, it's a whodunit, right? As Molly Francisco claims, it is becoming an intriguing whodunit in literary history. And lots of people have been interested in this intriguing whodunit literary history, including, as Molly Francisco claims, right? More than a century after Dickens's death, Rupert Holmes, best known for this song. Okay, maybe enough of that until he hits the refrain, right? The 1980s pop hit Escape, that Pina Colada song, right? This guy Holmes became one of several playwrights in the 1980s to take advantage of the unfinished novel. Several of those playwrights just finished the book, right? And they weren't just playwrights, they're also novelists, right? But Holmes did come up, or did not come up, with just one ending for Dickens's tale. He came up with several, and he decided to create a unique theater experience by letting the audience decide and which one they would see that night. Okay, I'm pretty sure you have had enough of that by now. Twin Cities audiences, Molly Francisco continues, will get a chance to see for themselves which one did it, who done it, as the mystery of Edwin Drood kicks off at the Burnsville Center for Performing Arts Black Box Theater on March 22nd. It runs through April 7th. Now, want to warn you, don't drive up to the Twin Cities expecting to see this movie, expecting to see this play. This was back in 2013, right? But it's still going on. I mean, you can go to New York City and see this play. It's still being played in Broadway. It was originally a Broadway play and was tremendously successful for Holmes and everybody else involved in it, which I think is a tribute to just what a great story this is, right? Now, it wasn't finished, right? This was made clear, right? I believe in what Francisco says, more than a century after Dickens's death, Holmes took up this unfinished novel, right? And it's very important to understand that the novel wasn't finished. So you could argue who done it? We don't know. We don't know who done it. Okay, so it's a who done it, but who done what? Who did what? Who murdered Edwin Drood? Now some say no one did. His body's never found, you know. And even if his tie pin is found, the book ends before resolving the mystery. Of course, it is a book that ends before it should have, because Dickens died, frankly, before finishing the book. Most say he was murdered, not Dickens, who died a natural death, but Edwin Drood. So who did what? Who murdered Edwin Drood? Most say he was murdered. Most believe he was murdered. And most say he who did it, Jasper, who you will see over there, Matthew Rhys, in the really wonderful BBC production of the film, or of the book. And it came out just a few years ago. You might remember this guy. You might recall this guy from a more recent show. He's the new Perry Mason that you can see on, I don't know whether it's AMC or what channel that is, with this, might be HBO, with this new kind of revisionist version of the old 1950s show about a lawyer named Perry Mason. Matthew Rhys earlier played Jasper, and I think did a wonderful job doing so. Okay, and it's maybe no surprise that they gave the position of Jasper, the role of Jasper, to the most important, Matthew Rhys at that point, I think already had a reputation, and they made sure to give him the role of Jasper. It's the most interesting role. It's a juicy role, and it is in fact the role of the Cain-like, Cain and Abel, the Cain-like murderer, as most people themselves solve the mystery of Edwin Drood. Okay. And you will recall his suspicious behavior. And you read up through chapter 12. You missed some of it, but I think you did see some of it. For example, the trip he takes with Durdles, where he insists on accompanying Durdles on his evening rounds, and is very attentive and very interested when Durdles points at that mound of quicklime. You will recall, which can be used to get rid of a body, right? I mean, maybe Edwin's body is not found because, in fact, Jasper covered it with quicklime and destroyed the body. So there's a lot of suspicious behavior. He does other things that evening. He's very, very alarmed when he sees, you might recall, Deputy hanging around because I think he's, you could argue if you're committed to the claim that Jasper, to the suspicion that Jasper did the dirty deed of killing Edwin, right? You will maybe not have too much trouble figuring out why he dislikes Deputy so much, because Deputy is just everywhere watching, right? I mean, his job, as it were, one of his jobs, is to, as you know, stone Durdle's home. So he's out very, very late looking for Durdles, and just seems to be everywhere at once watching, right? So you got all the, Jasper, because maybe he's going to try to do something untoward, doesn't like Deputy. So you can see that connection, right? There's also the possession of a motive on the part of Jasper, which is that he's very much taken with Rosebud, who you see in the background of this little picture over here on the left, making eyes at Edwin. And I had you read chapter 19, which of course, up until 19, it's something you have to just surmise or infer, but in chapter 19 it breaks into the light of day, literally, as they stand before the sundial, which is a symbol of something that we don't need to get into right now. And he openly states that he is in love with her. And it's a rather hard, scary scene, of course, because he threatens her by threatening Neville's sister, and threatens to expose Neville as the murderer. And when, the way this works is a lot feel he's framed Neville. See, he's carefully framed Neville. He's not just killed Edwin, but framed Neville, and then wants to hold Neville over Rosebud's head, Rosebud, who's become very friendly with Neville's sister, so as to compel Rosebud to accept his advances. So he has a motive, as well as as well as showing that he's in fact, interested in this activity, in this particular action. He has also shown that he's motivated to commit it. And you will recall, he has means. Okay, maybe not opportunity, but he has means. There is a murder weapon. If you look at that glossy scarf around the neck of Matthew Rhys in this picture, this has become what many believe, many of those who have committed themselves to the suspicion that Jasper is a murderer, that Edwin is his victim, that his intended object is in fact Rosebud, who is looking at us, the viewers here in this picture, and maybe seems to suspect that Jasper is watching somehow. That glossy scarf, many are sure is the murder weapon. And this is when we start to get into something really interesting about the book, I think, that takes it beyond being a mere whodunit, takes it into the realm of great literature, because in fact, it makes all of this, right, this, murder whodunit apparatus, makes it all signify something really, really important and interesting, and makes it carry this kind of thematic weight, carry this meaning that you probably wouldn't see in your typical, television whodunit, as we will begin to see in the very next slide. In itself. In itself, Jasper's scarf seems inconspicuous. Mr. Dickens notes on the day of Edwin's disappearance that the mere mechanism of Jasper's throat is a little tender, for he wears, both with his singing robe and with his ordinary dress, a large black scarf of strong, close woven silk, slunk loosely round his neck. Look at that paragraph. Do we take his scarf in itself? Do we not take it in context, the paragraph? These results are probably attained through a grand composure of the spirits. That's how the paragraph begins. The previous paragraph, which defines these results, Mr. Jasper is in beautiful voice this day. In the pathetic supplication to have his heart inclined to keep this law, he quite astonishes his fellows by his melodious power. He has never sung difficult music with such skill and harmony as in this day's anthem. His nervous temperament is occasionally prone to take difficult music a little too quickly. Today his time is perfect. Back to these results, which is the next paragraph. This is on page 180, by the way, in the chapter, When Shall These Three Meet Again? These results are probably attained through a grand composure of the spirits. Then we get to the business about the mere mechanism. What about this composure? On the next page, he's having a conversation with Chris Barkle. This is better, says Mr. Chris Barkle, stopping at the steps of his door to shake hands, than I could have hoped. Why, naturally, returns Jasper, you had but little reason to hope that I should become more like myself. You are always training yourself to be, mind and body, as clear as crystal, and you always are, and never change, whereas I am a muddy, solitary, moping weed. However, I have got over that mope. And on the previous page, we read, well, as he says it himself, perfect self-command. I mean, it's actually the minor canon who's using that language. I am wonderfully well, says Jasper. Chris Barkle inquired as to how he's feeling that day. Nothing unequal, says the minor canon, with a smooth motion of his hand. Nothing unsteady, nothing forced, nothing avoided. All thoroughly done in a masterly manner, with perfect self-command. That's a comment upon the conduct of Jasper. And Jasper's response is, thank you, I hope so, if it is not too much to say. One would think, Jasper, you'd been trying a new medicine for that occasional indisposition of yours. Some medicine other than opium. Well, what would that medicine be? What would be that medicine other than opium? It's interesting. He begins, we begin the novel. He begins the novel. His presence in the novel begins, you will recall, with his lying on a bed, okay, in an opium trance or stupor, really, unintelligible. Remember how that word keeps getting repeated. And I'll have a word to say about that here in a few minutes. Not so much that word as the scene. That's how he enters a novel. There's every reason to think. Now, he's a churchman. There's every reason to think, and he more or less gives evidence of this early on in the novel, that he's just so bored with his life as a religious music instructor. Okay, and he is, I know that's not specifically his title, but that's pretty much what he is, that he takes to opium. Okay, so you want to see opium as almost a solution to the problem of religion. Religion is not providing what he needs, and so he turns to opium. Well, what replaces the opium? Ironically, I'm going to argue it's going to be religion. Okay? And I think the clue to this is this business about the scarf, as we're going to see here in a few moments, which would seem to be the instrument of a particular religious sect. Now, we'll get to that very shortly, but let's make sure that we understand the sequence here. Starts out with religion, right? Christianity. Doesn't find it satisfying, moves to opium. Doesn't find the opium, as it were, satisfying, moves to, well, what? Another religion. What would that other religion be? Okay, that is, as I'm suggesting to you, somehow signified by the great black scarf. We'll find out in the next panel. Jasper's opium. Jasper's opium that replaces opium. Religion. What religion? Well, Jasper, some have argued, famously this fellow named Duffield back in the 1930s, that Jasper's a thuggy, and that the religion that has become his replacement for opium, though itself a kind of opiate, is Hinduism. Hinduism is the great horror of the book. Religion generally? Well, we'll get back to that one. Hinduism particularly? Because after all, Hinduism gives rise to thuggy culture. What's a thuggy? Well, I'm going to read through this for you, and maybe you'll follow along. This is taken from Wendy S. Jacobson, John Jasper, and Thucky from way back in the 1970s in the eminent literary critical journal, The Modern Language Review. Quote, the thugs were members of a savage brotherhood of murderers. What's this got to do with religion? Keep going. Whose methods were exposed during the British rule in India. In 1829, the Supreme Government of India found themselves at grips with a secret cult of religious assassins, among whom the craft of murder was sanctified as an ancestral right. A special police department devoted to the suppression of thuggee, which is the term applied to the cult, was established, and the work was completed only as late as 1904. Votaries of Kali goddess of destruction. The thugs did not murder, but sacrificed their victims to their goddess according to a prescribed method. And here's Duffield. Howard Duffield explains that, quote, murder by a thug was invariably a mysterious disappearance. Travelers who set out upon a journey never reached their journey's end. Neighbors vanished. Soldiers on furlough failed to return to the ranks. Nothing was ever known concerning a strangler's victim except that he was gone. And there are actual historical contemporaneous accounts of these episodes in which travelers out on the Great Trunk Road, famous road in northern India, would be met by a seemingly friendly group of folks who did not seem poor, seemed fairly well off, and seemed fairly elegant in many ways and quite presentable, these people. And there was nothing in their appearance or in their conduct that was frightening, but things would happen that evening, late, when they went to bed, and the group would be gone the next day, and there would be carnage left in their wake. As Jacobson continues, the number of disappearances grew to such proportions that the government was forced to undertake investigations which revealed facts so abhorrent that, until they were proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, the government refused to admit the existence of such crime. During 2/3 of the 19th century, the period spanned by the life of Dickens, one of the outstanding features of English rule in India was this effort to suppress the fanzigars, popularly known as thugs. And I can't help but pause and wonder whether you also had the experience of thugs as a young person in junior high, especially. I know that we called, like, the dudes you'd run into in the bathroom, who you weren't happy to run into them. We called them thugs. The discovery, history, and suppression of the thugs was reported in England and Europe with excitement in the gangs and their particular methods, not to mention the romantic tales and legends that grew up around them became common knowledge, as is evidenced in an article in Household Words, published some 20 years after the establishment of the Special Police Department in India. So then, is Jasper a thug? In this special sense of thug? Has he become one, a devotee of Kali? Let's say that Jasper has. Let's just say that he has. Well then, what does that say about finding religion? We tend, do we not, to think of one's finding God, finding religion, as at least a benign event in one's life, even if we cannot go along with those who would deem it a salvific one. What is Dickens saying about it? What is he saying about religion in itself? Here represented by a scarf that should not be taken, as we have seen, in itself. And is he, Dickens, saying it about Christianity as well as Hinduism? Presumably he is. Presumably, therefore, we have a book here profoundly distrustful of the religious temperament. Presumably indeed, we're presuming a lot, aren't we? Kali, worshippers of Kali, somehow standing for the religion of Hinduism, or I should say the religions of Hinduism. There are those who have said that Hinduism is 100 different religions, share a core, but whose differences should not be overlooked. Christianity, of course, can generalize from an indictment of Hinduism to an indictment of religion in general, which of course would include Christianity. Immediately you had to be thinking, wait, what about Chris Sparkle, right? I'll bet that objection occurred to you already. Chris Sparkle, a thug, pretty handy with his mitts, as most thugs are. But that's okay, he's supposed to be, for he's maybe you've seen this phrase before, a muscular Christian. As David Faulkner argues, an exemplary muscular Christian, the Reverend Septimus Crisparkle, presides over this novel. From the outset of mystery, Septimus Crisparkle, fair and wholesome, appears a pure specimen of the genus muscular Christian, a cultural ideal of Anglo-Saxon vigor and virtue, and an embodiment of, quote, the cultural values expressed in Christian manliness. Speaking of cults, a benign cult, a benign Victorian Christian cult, so to speak, or movement, maybe is a slightly less invidious term to apply to this group of Christians who called themselves muscular Christians. They existed. This is a real thing that happened in the Victorian era. And the Victorians would have uh, knowledgeable Victorians who knew their culture would immediately have recognized Septimus as an embodiment of this particular variety. So this is taken into account uh, a challenge, isn't it, to the claim offered in over the course of the last couple of slides. Oh, I get it. I know what you're thinking. I get it. Going into battle against horror, this is what the book is saying. You want Chris Sparkle by your side, and you want him with the gloves off. The book is not an all-purpose, blanket indictment of religion. The book's all about good religion versus bad religion. So it's picky and selective, right? Good local religion, good local Christian religion versus bad foreign Hindu religion. And you get the suggestion of the religious temperament of the book or religious sensibility of the book dovetailing with its attitudes about colonialism, where you wish the bad religion, would stay in its place, out there, over there, if not down under. You wish that the empire, in this one respect, would go away, right? This is sort of the anti-colonial quality of the book, where the book is somewhat critical of the British Empire. In this one respect, it keeps bringing bad things back with it, not just the imperial spoils, but what's foreign, other, and that which despoils the local, which in this case would be a local churchman, Jasper. Thus, we have another book registering the horror of other cultures, the foreign. But wait, what about passages such as the one in chapter 9, Birds in the Bush? Passages of which there are many, and passages which should give us pause. This is the one in which Mr. Grugey is calling on Jasper after calling on Rosa, visits a cathedral, and pauses at the great western folding door of the cathedral, which stood open on the fine and bright, though short-lived, afternoon for the earring of the place. Dear me, said Mr. Grewgious, peeping in, it's like looking down the throat of old time. Old time heaved a moldy sigh from tomb and arch and vault, and gloomy shadows began to deepen in corners, and damps began to rise from green patches of stone, and jewels cast upon the pavement of the nave from stained glass by the declining sun began to perish. Within the grille gate of the chancel, up the steps surmounted loomingly by the fast darkening organ, white robes could be dimly seen, and one feeble voice rising and falling in a cracked, monotonous mutter could at intervals be faintly heard. In the free outer air, the river, the green pastures, and the brown arable lands, the teeming hills and dales were reddened by the sunset, while the distant little windows and windmills and farm homesteads shone patches of bright beaten gold. In the cathedral, all became gray, murky, and sepulchral, and the cracked, monotonous mutter went on like a dying voice until the organ and the choir burst forth and drowned it in a sea of music. Then the sea fell, and the dying voice made another feeble effort, and then the sea rose high and beat its life out, and lashed the roof, and surged among the arches, and pierced the heights of the great tower, and then the sea was dry, and all was still. Well, this is a rich passage that I have just read in its entirety, but I would have you note one thing in particular, given our present purposes. Note how Dickens's narrative explores a contrast between the life to be found inside the cathedral, where all is gray, murky, and sepulchral, pretty Gothic, and what lies outside in the free outer air, where the river, the green pastures, and the brown arable lands, the teeming hills and dales were reddened by the sunset, while the distant little windows and windmills and farm homesteads shone patches of bright beaten gold. So it's pretty glorious and delightful out there in the free outer air. Everything that is the opposite of that sort of gray, murky, sepulchral, Gothic quality to be found inside the cathedral, which I think attaches to the cathedral itself and attaches to that which the cathedral represents, which I would like to hear phrased as cathedral Christianity in opposition to muscular Christianity. Because, Chris Sparkle, he seems to survive, and as does the muscular Christianity which he represents, right? Seems to survive this attack upon Christianity, which I want to, again, pointing attention to Dickens's being picky and selective in his critiques. He is picky and selective in his critique of a certain kind of Christianity, which I would like to oppose to muscular Christianity and call, as I just said, cathedral Christianity. Okay? So once again, we see that the attack upon religion in the book seems to be selective. There is a form of religion, a very specific form of Christian religion, which seems to survive the general discomfort and uneasiness that he exhibits in so many of its representations of Orthodox, or what we would call Orthodox religion, right? Traditional religion, of the sort that could be referred to, I suppose, as institutional religion, institutionalized religion, right? And which is not to say that, of course, that the minor canon, Chris Sparkle, is, has no institutional affiliation. He certainly does. But the best thing about Chris Sparkle seems to be that which is not to be found in his institutional dimension, right? But in kind of like his personal relations with people and that brightness, that crispness and sparkle that he seems to have, that he didn't pick that up. I think you would agree. It's not something that he learned inside the cathedral, according to what we're seeing of the cathedral and cathedral Christianity in this book. Okay. The cathedral, well, that's Gothic. Okay. And what's to be found as a remedy of or to the Gothic is to be found in that free outer air. So that's it for this week. We'll be returning to certain episodes in this book, especially the opening episode, which I think is just so wonderful in its what it suggests. We're going to be seeing this in some of the books that we'll be reading, especially Dracula, okay, that we still have ahead of us, right? This kind of fear of the other, as I was mentioning before, the fear of the foreign, of the alien, and this comes across as like an anti-multiculturalism, right? Where, Dickens is against certain, if not lock, stock, and barrel, certainly very unhappy about certain aspects of his own culture's colonial enterprise, okay? Because, as maybe we've seen, the colonial enterprise is such that the colonials come back when they return from being abroad. They bring things back with them. I've already mentioned this in an earlier plate. They bring back not just the spoils of empire, but also that which despoils. For example, opium, right? The opening scene. As well as things like thuggy culture, that particular strand of Hinduism, in Dickens's what we must recognize as Dickens's prejudicial view of Hindu religion. Well, more next time. I'll see you then. Have a good weekend.